for joining us for today's U.S. cannabis industry expert panel hosted by cannabis license experts. Today we are joined by quite a group of very talented individuals. So I'm just going to go around the circle, give everyone a moment to introduce themselves, and then we'll hop right into the process. Starting in my circle, Jenna, would you like to introduce yourself today?
Hi, yes, absolutely. My name is Jenna Rompel. I am a regulatory and licensing specialist for cannabis license experts. Essentially, I help clients navigate through the licensing process to get their license for their cannabis business. And following licensure, I help them with compliance matters to answer questions about what they can and cannot do with their license. I've been in the industry for over 5 years now. Huge market in California, and very excited to be continuing to work in this industry.
Excellent. Thank you. And next up we have Ryan.
Hi everybody, my name is Ryan Kokot. I'm a cannabis business attorney based in Sacramento, California, but I operate here in California, New York, and Massachusetts. I was formerly the head of legal and compliance for a public cannabis company for about 4 years. And all in have been in the cannabis industry offering legal services for about 7. Day in, day out, I mainly do contract compliance and corporate work for cannabis companies.
Excellent. And next up, a common reoccurring guest with us, we have Anthony Winston.
Hi, I'm Anthony Winston III, owner of Winston Engineering. I have been working in the cannabis space since about 2017 when adult became legal in California in 2017. My firm provides mechanical, electrical, plumbing, with mechanical being HVAC. So HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and civil engineering for cannabis facilities. So essentially, if it's within a building, we can provide the engineering construction permit plans. We're not beholden by any borders. We work across the entire US. We work from the West Coast to the East Coast. I myself am licensed in 12 different states, as well as having a presence in a couple provinces in Canada.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And next up we have Chris Budd. We have 2 Chris's today, so I will try my best to keep you guys separate.
Thank you, Marie. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Budd. I'm one of the founders of Isolocity. We're quality management software that's focused on automating GMP and ISO compliance for cannabis producers. Isolocity is currently deployed in 14 different countries across the globe, all for cannabis-related matters. We work in a lot of different states in the United States and also have a big presence up in Canada. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. And Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Pyan. I'm an educator, public speaker, policy advocate, and writer, and I host a nationally distributed podcast, Planted with Sarah Pyan, on the Radio Misfits Network. I have been in the industry for over a decade, and I have over 18,000 hours of experience guiding and educating consumers. I also create educational and training opportunities for the industry, healthcare, higher learning, and I've created curricula for colleges and universities. My background is in civil rights, and I am a stage 3 cancer survivor, which is what got me into this work. So media, education, and policy are my passions.
Excellent. Congratulations. Next, we have Benjamin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Benjamin Landaverde. I'm a independent insurance brokerage agency owner. I've been specializing in cannabis insurance for the past 7 years or so now, and I was one of the co-founders of OG Cannabis Insurance, which now, I ventured on my own route here. Recently, I'm licensed in all cannabis approved states. So I do everything on a daily basis. What I do is everything from state required insurance, bonds, general liability, workers' comp, to everything in between, product liability, crop insurance, building insurance, cargo and transit. And, I've had my experience here in California, most of my clients, but as East Coast is ramping up, I'm starting to gain clients there and insight there. So that's pretty much what I do.
Awesome. Excellent. And following with Chris Eggers.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Eggers. I'm the founder and CEO of CC Security Solutions. We're a risk management and security consulting firm. We offer security consulting, site design plans, security plans, but really are more focused on the risk management side, in addition to developing educational content specifically for the city of LA and the DCR for social equity applicants to help folks best understand what risk management really means. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And thank you for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have Bob Irish joining us as well.
Good morning, everybody. I'm last because I checked in last, right? Otherwise, I would have moved up some. Anyway, I'm a real estate broker, have been for 20 some years. About 4 years ago was my first foray into the cannabis industry, where a guy called me and said, "Hey, can you sell my building? There used to be cannabis there." I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And that was the beginning of my cannabis career. But I do sell businesses, licenses, and buildings. My office is based out of Southern California, but I do it all over California. And lastly, I do actually operate a distro in SoCal as well. So I have that industry experience there as well.
Awesome. So as everyone has heard, we have a wonderfully talented group of panelists with us today. So please feel free to pop your questions into the chat. And we're going to get started with Jenna giving us a bit of an industry overview as to where we're at the moment across the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening right now. The top things that have been on my radar are after the last November elections here. Missouri and Maryland both passed for legalization for adult use. And North Dakota, South Dakota, and Arkansas did fail on those measures, but hopeful for the future for those to be passed at a later time. President Biden did sign the Medical Marijuana and Cannabis Research Expansion Act, which will essentially help the FDA pave the way for medical research of marijuana, and in the future hope to look into descheduling that and pave the way for federal legalization. In New York, they recently approved 36 retail licenses. So those retail licenses are moving forward with the process to hopefully be open within the next couple months or so. Nevada also recently approved some consumption lounge for adult use, and those consumption lounge applications are moving forward through the process to be open sometime in the first half of next year. And New Jersey also actually just released some approved some regulations for consumption lounges as well. So I'd say those are kind of the top things that are going on right now. And we've got some more movement into legalization into other states as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So while I wait for some of our attendees' questions to come through for each of you, I've got some, so don't worry. I'm going to get Sarah's opinion on this first, and then anyone else jump in. But will the legal market in California eventually be owned by only a handful of larger corporations?
I certainly hope not. As a member of the California, I actually am a member of the state advisory committee, and one of the things that I want to do is make sure that we have the opportunities for smaller businesses to succeed. I don't think that MSOs, that large companies, are necessarily a bad thing, because they can help with policy and also create greater availability and accessibility. But when we're looking at especially the constituents of the state and creating opportunities and also generational wealth, and the fact that there are a lot of great fine artisan brands out there, we should really be encouraging small business that can work alongside large companies.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to pop in on their opinion on this?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I could jump in real quick. I agree, and Sarah, in the sentiment of, I hope it doesn't get there. If we look at any other industries, such as alcohol or food or any industries in the United States, it seems like it always sums down to a few handful that end up owning it. There is the market for the craft beers, if you take the alcohol, and I think there's still artisan growers that they're still going to have following, and they're diehard followers, but it just seems more and more as I've been doing this insurance more in certain areas, as you know, the heavy regulation and taxes and competing with the black market has been an issue where people are starting to sell their licenses or shutting down or merging or being acquired. So it just seems like it's going that route. As of recent, hopefully as new licenses and new cities open up, maybe someone gets it right where they have the right medium where people could, they could expand more or be able to be successful. But as of now, it seems that way.
I just wanted to touch on that real quick. To piggyback off what Benjamin was saying about the alcohol industry, like I enjoy wine and I love traveling, drinking wine. And I think if the cannabis industry approached it that way, where you have regions, right? Everybody, it's out there in the world that Cali has like the best bud, right? So why not have varietal, right, regions where you have Humboldt County, where maybe you have, I don't know, I'm thinking worldwide, right? You got something from South Africa or whatever the case may be. I think that would be really cool because the big guys can't. It's something you can't capture that local vibe, right, with big organizations. And then to touch on the selling of the licenses, I think that's a really big issue, especially with social equity applicants. And I use social equity loosely because it's not very equitable, right? It's a lot of issues with these programs where you're trying to quote unquote give back, right? Where you're giving a license to someone who hasn't had business experience, right? So you dump a bunch of cash in front of them, and of course, especially depending on where you come from, you're going to take that cash. So I think there needs to be some serious limitations on what folks can do with the licensing, but also I think states need to do a better job of educating those license holders so that they can be successful.
Anthony, I'd like to just follow up and say I totally agree. There are some municipalities that are trying their best to educate social equity applicants, and absolutely agree to your point about wine, right? I mean, I've never met anybody in the alcohol industry that's more passionate about alcohol than a winemaker. And let's not forget about the passion for the plant that a lot of our clients and colleagues have that brought us here to begin with. And, Sarah shined on that a little bit with us in the beginning. So, I don't think that you can count out passion for the plant and that drive that the operators have to move this industry forward. So I don't think that a few small companies are going to own all of it. I think that the passion for the plant is going to shine through eventually. Once, to your point, Anthony, some of the cities and municipalities get it right and start to set up folks who have legacy experience, set them up for success in this industry.
I'd like to piggyback on that, especially with what Anthony was saying. Now that we're getting into the era of legalization, we actually have more resources for equity applicants. I come from Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area, which is the oldest civil rights organization on the West Coast. And they have a program called Legal Services for Entrepreneurs, which has worked for decades helping people start their own businesses with the help from pro bono attorneys that are coming from the big firms. And this year I was able to connect them with success centers, have them start doing some of the work together and having people that don't have skin in the game and they just want to see people succeed. And then also talking about working with people with financial backgrounds that are helping people, because when you're making the money, now what do you do with it? How do you create that generational wealth and asset building so that we can have strong businesses and even stronger legacies in our families?
If I could comment a little bit, since I buy and sell or help people try to buy and sell, a couple different things Anthony said, social equity. You're right, nobody helps them. They give them a license, they figure it out. Well, they have no experience, how they figure it out. They have no money, they can't start the business. So you have social equity people that are just stuck. It's not a good program. It doesn't help anybody. It's a good idea, but it's not helpful because no one's providing the necessary help that you truly do need. What I always say is a weed guy might know how to grow weed, but he doesn't know how to run a business. And the business guy knows how to run a business, but doesn't know how to grow weed. And you got these two ding dongs talking to each other, and you're like, how do you get the two things together? So, When a guy says, "Oh, I want to buy a dispensary," I go, "Great." He goes, "What's their EBITDA?" I go, "You're an idiot. Leave me alone." When you start the conversation off with what's their EBITDA, you're just like, okay, great. I understand how that works. I understand business. Thank you very much. But have the license has a value, the location has a value, the build out has a value, and the $300,000 in sales is zero. But you don't want to pay the guy that's doing $3 million a year because he wants too much money for his business. So my whole point is, eventually, I hope that the business guys understand weed and the weed guys get smarter on business, and the social equity people are not given licenses unless they get help. And if there's any financial help coming, whether that be through the Fed saying finally yes, or the states loosening up, whatever that might be, it's going to make it easier for people to get help. You can't go get an SBA loan, right? You can't do this that normal businesses do. So until that normalizes, the answer is it's going to stay the weed guy trying to run a business poorly, and the business guy trying to figure out how to do weed poorly. And then I stay busy because they fail, and then I get to sell their business. So that's what I see. That's what I see from this side. But anyway.
And I see that, having been in the Canadian cannabis industry for a little over 10 years myself, just commenting on Cannabis there, is what we're seeing is, yes, there's a lot of additional cannabis within our market, and people are going, oh, there's an oversupply. But no, it's happening and what I see, and I think will happen is through the various states as well, is that consumers are becoming more educated and looking for a specific type of product that some of the larger MSOs here just aren't producing. And because they have stockholders, they just keep producing, so they can say they have so many grams in their inventory. But we are seeing smaller companies navigating on small margins due to our tax policies, but who are really coming out on top and doing really, really well, which is, it's an ongoing process for all of us. Okay, now let's see, kind of going with Christian Gray's question. As we move into 2023, what states have we seen the most opportunity on, and which ones do we think are going to evolve into those states that have the most opportunities? I'm leaving that to the room.
I can jump in on that. I think the most obvious answer would probably be New York. And that's actually, it's a good segue from what you guys were just talking about in equity, as far as discussing equity programs, because, over the years, the point I've always made to people when it comes to equity programs is that none of them to this point have done a great job of addressing the astronomical costs of real estate, which is why I'm interested to see what happens in New York, because they've taken the novel approach of actually providing locations for the CAURD applicants. So I'm kind of interested to see how that all plays out. I know there was a little bit of back and forth in terms of whether or not equity applicants had the choice of using a state location or their own, but I do think New York did something smart in that they are addressing that issue being real estate, especially. I mean, can you imagine trying to rent a place in Manhattan or anywhere in the city? It would be impossible, and ultimately I'm interested to see what happens there. And just to dovetail off of the equity issue in general, I think taking steps like New York has in terms of providing locations is a necessary step, but I think smaller operators are going to struggle until 280E, the tax code that prohibits cannabis companies from taking deductions, is addressed. Would be the only thing I would add on to the conversation you guys were already having.
Yeah. If I could add on real quick onto that, Ryan, I mean, as to the question, I think time will tell. I feel like we're still in the infancy of the industry in total when you compare to any other business industry in history, here in the United States. So time will tell. And I guess success, what are we measuring success by? If we're saying success in the terms of money, or in the longevity of time, if we look at the first market that was approved, Colorado, you can see what's happening there. It looks pretty grim as far as what everything's happening. New York, as you mentioned, hopefully they get it right. As far as the way the real estate is set, that's a great concept. Things always sound nice on paper until they play out in real life, and then you find out what the real nuances or the issues that come about. So I know what I read in New York, there's a few construction companies that they're using. So I don't know, so it's just how does it look behind the scenes? What does that really mean? And so I feel like California still has a lot to grow. We still have the reputation, the name, as Anthony said earlier, that the best weed grows in the West, but that's to tell as well. So I feel like I think time will tell, I guess, the answer overall, what industry is doing the best or what state. So I'm biased, so I say California, but yeah, it hasn't shown that really.
And to speak on what you just said about construction in New York, I was very surprised to hear that in New York that they're essentially the city sends you to a construction company, right?
Right.
And to me, that it seems like only the big boys are going to make it. And then
Exactly.
as an engineering firm that is hired a lot of times by the construction firms, it's like, well, a small firm such as ours, being able to work with a large construction company is a daunting task. It's not impossible, but it's daunting. So now you're leaving out a lot of the smaller firms, a lot of the especially minority-owned construction firms, architects, right? It's a whole pipeline of business when it comes to construction, from the design and engineering and actually building it. And is there any oversight in New York to make sure that companies with minority designations actually get a piece of that, right? Because when it comes to public work, a lot of times they have to have that. Do they have it for cannabis? And that I'm not sure of.
Well, first of all, New York, definitely, there's no such thing as a perfect setup. And I'm guessing Sarah could speak to that, being on the committee here in California, that, there's give and take, and there's just political realities, I think, of getting a bill through. And I'll give you a perfect example in New York. What was interesting to me is to qualify for this most recent round of equity retail applicants, you had to show a profitable business. And I did a consultation with someone who has run a relatively successful business here in California and otherwise qualified in New York, having had a prior conviction 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was, but didn't qualify for the application process because his company that has been in business for 5 years here is technically not profitable. So you're literally taking away someone who has known cannabis experience by virtue of the requirements that you set out. I just, look, guys, there's a human element to this, and I think at a certain point in time, it's impossible to get the entirety of it right. I think we just have to kind of work through these issues as we go along.
I agree. I think one of the takeaways that I've seen going to different states is that the policies aren't necessarily based on fact or based on observation, and we really shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. We're watching people create policy all the time and seeing how their experiments are going. They're actually really amazing case studies when you look at them. But, it's based on state culture and stigma. It's now not necessarily based on common sense when we're looking at a lot of these policies. When I went to Oklahoma the other year, which just a couple years ago, we would have been talking about them as like the hot new area where everybody's going to and starting their businesses. Because I know tons of people from California who went there when they were finding that they couldn't have any success with their businesses here in California. They were struggling. But for all of the businesses that they were allowing for a while there, when I was in Oklahoma City, there were so many vacant storefronts that had once been dispensaries. So they kind of went for like a feast or famine sort of thing. What do we learn from these things in states, and how can we apply these so that we're not wasting our time having to backtrack on policy and change things?
I like today's discussions. Okay, so I'm going to follow up with an additional question that kind of leads into this. But in what states are we expecting to see legalization in 2023? What got any of you?
I bet Ryan knows.
I was going to say Ryan or Anthony, because his hands are in so many states already.
I'm not making any predictions. I've learned that lesson the hard way on a LinkedIn post not too long ago, but I'm interested to see what happens in Texas and in Florida. I think are two interesting states to watch, and I'm interested to see how New York develops. I know it's already legalized, but just to see how their program develops, and they're going through what we went through here in California not too long ago in terms of notice and comment rulemaking. So you're going to see different. We have a set of regs right now in New York, but they're going to change inevitably. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out as well.
Yeah, I second that in terms of using social media to make predictions. We got licensed in Illinois like the year was supposed to happen, and then of course it happened like a year or two later, and I'm just sitting there with an engineering license, which is not a huge deal, and it worked out because we did a couple of dispensaries last month. But Texas is interesting, and for me, it's not interesting because of the adult use and medical. It's on the hemp side of things. You got so much land out there, and we're looking at doing engineering for hemp processing facilities. So that's really what I'm keeping an eye out for Texas, because they just have so much land.
I'm interested to see all the so-called Bible belts. When they get approved, how are they going to be approached? If they're so conservative, what their approach is going to be. I mean, as you mentioned, Texas, you practically be dying to qualify for the medical card. And so is it the same? Is it going to be the same type of rules, or what is it going to change when it comes to adult use or recreational? Obviously, we have Missouri, Maryland, and New York that just recently got voted on this past year. But, those states, once they start opening up, I think that's going to give us a balance to see if it's really constricted compared to the more liberal states. And I think that might even help produce a successful state once we see two different models. But I'm excited to see that, or I'm interested to see how that develops.
It's funny about the Bible Belt you bring up. My mom's older, obviously, than me, but quite religious, and I kind of thought she'd be a little weird about the whole thing. There seems to be that 75 to 85-year-old person who you think's conservative and religious and Bible Belt. They actually are good proponents of. They understand, the qualities of CBD as well. And they're not as resistant to it as I thought they were going to be. So whether it's CBD or THC, but they're using it. We got the VA, right? The VA is talking about, for PTSD, for multiple issues, for glaucoma, for things like that. I think the older generation, again, I'm getting there, I guess, too, but the older generation sees the benefit in non-opioids, right? So the cannabis does create medical beneficial. I mean, our body does require, certain things, and opioids are terrible, right? But my mom's 78 years old, and she's like, nope, I'm all for marijuana. And you're like, Mom, you're a religious Bible thumper, blah, blah, blah. Well, doesn't even drink, but marijuana's okay. So I see a kind of an interesting discussion with that baby boomer generation, that they, as much as you said Bible thumpers, Bible Belt, I think they're actually for it. I think they understand it is a better deal than these prescription meds that they're doing. So I'm hoping that helps. My point is, I'm hoping that helps, whether it be getting federal or every state saying yes to, or at least getting medical in more states. That I think that's kind of different. The older generation's actually for it.
Excellent. Okay, so that leads me into an interesting follow-up question. So how are the various branches involved in the regulations of hemp versus cannabis? Kind of federal versus the various states, and kind of who you look to for your guidance on those laws. I'm going to start with Ryan for that one.
So it's actually super interesting, recent developments. You're starting to see the hemp market develop in the same way to some degree that we've seen with the marijuana under federal law market. And what I mean by that is that to this point, the feds, the FDA, when you're talking about hemp derived products, has really taken a hands-off approach, and a lot of the warning letters that they've sent have been to CBD companies that are making outlandish claims in terms of being able to cure cancer and things like that. But what's interesting is that warning letters were just sent out to companies, I think, that were including CBD in food, which is a no-no as it stands under the FD&C Act, just because the FDA has not determined that as being safe. So what's interesting about that, and how it's similar to what we see with marijuana markets, is that obviously marijuana markets, it's legalized under state law, and cannabis still remains a Schedule I substance under federal law. So you have that conflict. But despite the fact that there's been no action by the FDA, some states, such as California, are starting to authorize CBD, hemp-derived CBD producers to add CBD to food. So you're starting to see a bit of conflict, and I think states are kind of just getting sick of waiting for the FDA to take the next step in that regard. So you're having that same conflict between federal and state law begin to develop in the hemp-derived CBD market, as you already have between the Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act and state marijuana programs. But I mean, at the most base level, we still, if and when marijuana is legalized at the federal level, my understanding is that the FDA is going to have some hand in that, more likely than not. Then at the state level, we have usually most states on the marijuana end of things are employing dual licensing systems where you're having to get licensed at both the local and state level in most circumstances.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I just have a question that just popped into the thread. I'm just going to scroll up to it. So while I wait for that to scroll up, let me ask another question I'm going to direct this one at you, Bob, as a starting point, and then anybody else who wants to hop in as well. But how much capital is required to start a cannabis business? I know it's a loaded question, but where would people get started with this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a proponent of buying somebody else's mistake. You know, I'm a short sale REO mentality, right? So you can go get a license for basically, nothing, I call it. But you also have to wait 2 years and pay rent and then do the build out. And so what's a license cost? Next to nothing. $5,000 application fee, $25,000 application fee. Yeah, but you have to have a location first before you can even do that, right? So now you're paying rent and the build outs, and a delivery is maybe the cheapest license to get and the cheapest build out to have, but you're still out a year or two's worth of rent at $2, $3, $4, $5 a month for a tiny spot. So my answer is go someone who did pay rent for a couple of years, who did go through the license procedure, who's gotten to that point where they're saying, you know what, I'll take 100 just to get out. I'll take 200 just to get out. And while that might be a lot of money all at once, when people say, well, I can just go get a license for 5 or 10 or 20 grand, and forget all the costs that it takes to get to that point where you have a valid operatable license. So that's my answer. Buy someone else's mistake, get as the best deal you can. Yes, it's going to cost you a couple $100K, whether it be a delivery, a distro, a manufacturing. Yes, dispensaries cost more. I mean, I have the cheapest one now. It's probably $300K in Lompoc. But who wants to go to Lompoc? They issued 7,000 licenses. There's only 7,000 people there. So it's kind of funny to think about, where do you want to be? What do you want to do? And what are you good at?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Rob, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say, and it also depends on where you are, right? They talked about New York is super expensive. California has one of the most stringent efficiency rules with their Title 24 rules than any other state I've dealt with. So you have people who come to California and we give them a drawing set and they're like, what the hell is this? I'm like, well, you have to adhere to Title 24. You have to adhere to, let's say in your retail space, you got windows, you got to do daylight harvesting. So as the sun comes further into your space, you have to have a system that automatically dims the lights, right? So depending on the size of your building, you might have to have a building management system that during peak times when the system is stressed, they're going to lower the lights in your building, not your grow lights, but your general lights. So it really depends on location. Then of course, location, you got to deal with labor costs. Labor costs are totally different depending on what state you're in.
Right.
All right. I know when Sarah mentioned everybody going from California to Oklahoma, I remember one of the biggest things is how cheap and easily it was accessible out there. Some of the clients I spoke to out there has gotten, if I'm not mistaken, as cheap as $4,000 to get a license, a growing license or a grower's license. And, when I speak to clients out here, how much is to set up, like, let's say in the Los Angeles area, a retail shop, including, real estate. If you're not purchasing it, if you're leasing, it could be upwards up to $1 million just to get your foot in the door. So, and that includes, all the costs that was mentioned from the other panelists. So it varies from state to state, city to city. And as Bob mentioned, sometimes you buy it in a city where it may not even make sense to get it, even if you do get the quote unquote golden ticket. The candy factory may not be there to be given. I mean, I see Cathedral City. You go in there and there's a dispensary almost every corner, but does the population call for that? So I'm just sometimes it may cost that. I think it's more research and to make that decision of where it really is going to make sense or profitable. But state to state, city to city, it's going to vary. And so I mean, I guess as low as 4,000 I've heard, and as upward as $1 million for a retail in a prime area in Los Angeles. So it's going to vary for people.
My one piece of actionable advice to take from the whole M&A discussion is make sure you check the local regulations to see if there's any restrictions on acquiring ownership of a license. That's always a huge thing. And from the question in terms of how much does it cost, that's going to vary depending on where you're looking at and what type of license and the like. But make a budget. I can't tell you how many people I do consultations with that aren't even necessarily acquiring a license, but just looking to get started up. And they've not just sat down with just a basic Excel spreadsheet and listed out what's this going to cost at the end of the day. So those are, I guess, my two pieces of advice when it comes to that question.
Ryan, I'd like to follow up on that and say that when you do, sort of line item out your budget, understand what is your expectation with respect to that budget. We on the security side have a lot of folks come to us that, want to spend the least amount of money possible and get the cheapest option, but then they expect the result to be, really great. Just like anything else, you get what you pay for, right? And so that goes with security guard companies, that goes with installation companies. Every panelist here can speak to somebody in their wheelhouse that's, in the race to the bottom, so to speak, right? And so when we're talking about budget, understand and think about what is the expectation that comes along with that money spent. I think is a really important part all along through the application process.
Excellent. Thank you all for your input. And now we have a question from one of our viewers today, Alexa Frazier. She says, hey there, could Anthony explain a little more about the knowledge and meeting towards engineering hemp process towards the land in Texas?
So what I meant by that is that there's a ton of land to grow hemp in tons of acreage, right? You still have to process that. So if you're taking it inside to process it, you're going to need tons of equipment. You're going to need lots of square footage. We've done a couple in Colorado. So that's mainly what I meant. Hemp processing is a lot less stringent than if you're growing flower, right? You have to, you got your different rooms, dry, cure, everything like that. But with hemp is not as difficult. That's really what I meant by that.
Does anybody else want to share 2 cents on their thoughts about the potential hemp market in Texas?
I mean, I want to see it. Like Ryan said, if it's anything with the other states, it's going to be approved locally, municipalities, and then statewide. Who knows how many are going to ban it off the bat or come on once they see the tax money roll in. So, but I mean, yeah, there's a lot of space. There's farms out there already now, probably, doing it on the backside of the barn, and I'm sure they're getting experience from it. So, I mean, it's, I want to see it happen. It'll be great for Texas.
Okay. And now we're going to go to Alexander. I'm going to stay there because I hate pronouncing names incorrectly. but he wants to know if there will be an export law in 2023.
I could speak to that a little bit. I don't think that's ever going to really happen until the federal government endorses the cannabis industry in the United States. And you won't be able to export out the medical grade product unless it's been regulated by the FDA. So that's something that I think is a big challenge right now in the U.S. market as far as getting the FDA involved, and what does that look like as far as regulating cannabis properly, like it's regulated in the EU and Canada for production purposes. This is where we get involved with the GMP and the ISO compliance, and ensuring that the quality of the product is safe to consume and it's consistent, and delivering the same results every time you grow, every time you run your production.
I have a comment that's sort of kind of related, but
Okay.
it goes the other direction. I've had a couple of people call from I know Ukraine was actually going to start growing marijuana before the war started, but they ended up moving to Istanbul. They now produce grow pots, the like the rock wool pots there as well. Turns out most of those actually come from the EU or from whatever, which again, I didn't know till I got into the distro side of it. I know that's not what we're not exporting, it's the importing, but of products and things. But I do know that there are plenty of European countries that will be, beginning to grow marijuana if they can as well. But it's interesting to see that the rock wool pots are actually coming from Europe, and maybe something's going to happen. Maybe it's just products, maybe it's just supplies, but it isn't going to be actual, physical product. Or how do we get seeds over there if they want to start growing in Ukraine? I was actually over there a year and a half ago. How do I get seeds from here to there? You know what I mean? What do you do to transport that, to take a California Humboldt seed, and take that over there to grow if it actually grows?
Right.
That's
and
just
I think,
personal.
yeah, and I think you see a lot of European countries, importing from places that have been regulated by their health authorities to export product. You see several producers in Canada who are EU GMP certified. You have several in Colombia, South Africa. So this is already starting to happen in the international cannabis market. It's just not happening right now in the U.S. cannabis market because there's no real companies who are actually federally regulated. Unless you're federally regulated, no EU GMP auditor is going to come over and review your facility for export purposes. So I think to kind of go back to the main root cause, in order for that to happen, it's got to become a federally regulated product by the FDA. The FDA regulates cosmetics, they regulate food, beverages, drink, pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, everything that we consume, touch, or inhale is regulated by the FDA, except cannabis.
It's interesting to watch from the outside, I have to say. Okay, so we have a question from Sean Broder, and I think I might break this into two questions because it looks like there's a bit of a technical debate happening within the little chat here. But Sean Yoder asked, are the hemp states going to be completely overrun by synthesized Delta-8 and Delta-9? Maybe we'll start with someone addressing the difference between synthesized cannabinoids and naturally derived Delta-8 and Delta-9. Let's look at Jenna. Do you want to address that one?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. I would say that in this area, I honestly, I don't think I have enough expertise on that. If I could defer to Brian, so I apologize for that, but I don't know if I'd be able to effectively answer his question.
No, that is fair. We'll always take honesty when it comes to regulatory discussions over anything else. We can always find an answer in the future. But Brian is not with us today. Does anybody else want to tackle that question, or is it something we can maybe address through an email after the session today?
I'll try. I think that education really comes into play when we're looking at this. Personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I am not a fan of synthesized cannabinoids. I'm also not a fan of utilization of isolated cannabinoids because I feel that there is really something very special with all the terpenes and different cannabinoids and all their different levels showing up in plant-based products. Also, I think that there are some huge problems with the way the hemp-derived CBD market is done because, as we know, there have been tests that have shown, whether we're talking about hemp or cannabis, it's a bioaccumulator, and whatever you grow it in and around, it absorbs. And are we testing these products to make sure that they don't have anything in them that shouldn't be in them? And the levels of CBD or other cannabinoids, are those correct? And when we have been seeing issues with, there was a child recently that had consumed gummies that were rich in Delta 8, and it was problematic. I think that we really, really, really need to have more education and regulation around it because, quite honestly, and forgive my language, it's going to bite us in the ass.
Oh, that is fair. Blunt talk is always good talk. Let's see. Cameron, congratulations for one. And two, I'm going to move into a question from Corey Higgs. This is kind of getting back to Bob's last comments about Ukraine, but he's wondering how people are legally getting those seeds out of the country and overseas.
Yeah, I was there to figure it out. that was why I was going there. I don't know the answer, but that was just something that I knew enough people over there who wanted to do it, and the farmland over there used to be incredible, obviously, and now, of course, it probably is never going to happen. But I don't know. That's where I was. I flew over to meet people, to talk to people, to then figure out how to export a seed, and I don't know the rules because I just didn't get there. But I know it's possible. I just have to be smart enough to figure it out again.
Nope, that is fair when you're dealing with international regulations as well as federal ones, and then state laws as well. Working with someone like yourself or any of the people on this panel to make sure they're getting the kind of top advice and guidance moving forward in anything that's a little ambiguous at this point is extremely valuable. Okay, so
I may be able to add something there, Marie.
Please do.
So, and actually, you guys, Jenna and Marie, if you guys are in Canada, you may be able to speak to this as well. But I do believe, just a fun fact, that UC San Diego, I think, actually imported cannabis from Canada years ago for research purposes. So I think there are technically, I mean, I don't think that was really the context of the question that was asked. I think they're asking from more of a commercial perspective, but I do think there are avenues to import, very limited avenues to import into the United States. But in terms of seeds, I'll frame the issue and then I'll give a recommendation in terms of information to look into for a solid answer on it. The fight to this point when it comes to seeds is a seed in the moment, in the sense that should we be classifying seeds as hemp or marijuana based on the existing THC level in that moment, or should we be classifying it based on what it ultimately becomes when it's grown to a mature plant? And that's often referred to as the source rule, or the first option is referred to the source rule. If you want to know more about that end of things, I would recommend reading what Shane Pennington, who is a cannabis attorney, has written about it. He's actually gone as far as getting a letter from the DEA on that exact issue. And the answer to that question, I think, will feed directly into the legality of importing, exporting seeds. But even at that, the company I previously hit up the legal for operated here in the United States and internationally. And I'm not a trade attorney, but we dealt with some of this stuff. Regardless of the answer to that question, you need to be looking at the source country in the country you're trying to get into to truly answer that question as well, because in the same way that states in the United States have different cannabis regulations, different countries have different rules of the game when it comes to that sort of stuff.
I hope that provides a little bit of insight to everyone, and recommended reading is always a good thing. Been making notes myself here, so thank you very much for that, Ryan. All right, so another question. I'm going to give you another loaded one here, Ryan. And again, everybody jump in on this one because I know it is a loaded question, but how close are we to federal cannabis legalization in the US? Everyone's most hated question.
It's a, like I joked about earlier, I've already kind of made this mistake once, and I don't want to make it twice in terms of making any sort of prediction. It was sort of interesting, the conversation I think you were having, Bob, earlier, that I do think this is becoming less of a partisan issue, is the point I would make. I don't know that any of us are going to get up here and tell you when it's going to happen by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're definitely experiencing a shift here, and there's some talk. I actually was talking to someone today in the know that there may still be a chance that baking makes it into another larger bill. So that would be an interesting development. And obviously that we're not talking necessarily about federal legalization in that context, but it would certainly be a step towards that. But I'm sure everybody else on the panel can also hop in and get me off the hot seat here.
No, let me go a couple things. So it's interesting. I found out through the building purchases and such, East West Bank is doing 65% loan to values at 7-8%. That's regular. Okay, fine. They're an Asian-based bank, but the point is, East West Bank is a real bank in the U.S. or at least California. I don't know if they're all over, but turns out that Wells Fargo is actually allowing the purchase of a strip mall or whatever you want to call it, that as long as no more than 10% of the revenue comes from a dispensary or cannabis-related activity, that they will still finance that strip mall or that building. So you could have 10 tenants and everyone has 1,000 square feet. And as long as that 10% of the income, Wells Fargo will actually loan money on that. So there's a small chain of credit unions I'm not even talking about because they don't do commercial per se. But there is that change already where there's some banks that are doing it. Credit unions can do whatever they want. But even Wells Fargo says as long as no more than 10% of the revenue of the purchase of the strip mall, that we will loan money. So it's slowly changing. And of course, they had that 3% rule, the feds, and hey, if we do federal, we can do 3%, we can do this. And, Chase and Wells Fargo and Bank of America, those guys have to get on board. Well, looks like Wells Fargo's on board a little bit. So I think it's coming. That's my point. I think it's heading that way.
Excellent. I mean, evolution has to start somewhere, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if anybody else has any questions they want to pop into the chat, and I'm not just using my questions or interpretations of what you guys are discussing in there, please feel free to add them to the chat. Now here is actually a very important question, I think, for a lot of people who are attending today is, who am I going to direct this to? Bob and Chris Eggers. Do you need to live in the state that you are applying for a license in?
I think that question is better answered by one of the attorneys in the room.
Attorneys? Okay.
Yeah, we don't offer legal advice, and we would refer questions like that to attorneys. And again, can we answer it? Sure. But just to kind of keep things on the even keel, I think it's important for people in the audience to understand where questions should be best directed.
No, absolutely. I just felt like I was throwing a lot at Ryan today.
I'm used to it. Don't worry about it.
And why not? Why wouldn't you?
Look at that smile.
Got the answers.
So this is a big fight right now. And I think someone mentioned Oklahoma earlier. I know Oklahoma has a state residency requirement. But as we've seen, there's lawsuits popping up based on the Dormant Commerce Clause. There's been one in Maine. There was a suit just filed in New York. And also, Chris Eggers, I believe you said you were involved in LA. I think there was one just filed by the same group that filed in Michigan in LA going after their program. And to make a very long story short, the U.S. Constitution grants express authority to Congress to regulate interstate commerce. And the negative implication of that is if a state does something that interferes with interstate commerce, it can be struck down as being unconstitutional. So essentially, people are coming into these state programs and saying, hey, you're saying I have to be a New York resident to be able to qualify for this program. That runs afoul of the Dormant Commerce Clause. Is kind of the gist of it. And I actually kind of figured this was going to come up, so I was reading a little bit before we hopped on. And the law firm Perkins Coie, I think PERKINS COIE, I apologize if I spelled that wrong, put together like an 8-pager on Lexis that's actually free if you just Googled cannabis and the Dormant Commerce Clause, and that would be worth the read. But without, obviously none of this is legal advice, we're just chatting, but I'm doubting whether or not these residency requirements are going to be around for much longer, is my general take.
Okay.
But whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave up to the rest of the group, but that's just from a legal perspective what I'm seeing.
Okay, I'm going to actually use that as a follow-up question of my own to the group, is having talked a little bit about the size of the MSOs versus the craft and mom and pops, do you see this foresee this potential evolution around state requirements being beneficial or a detriment to these smaller businesses?
Are we talking about the existing regulations, or right?
Yes, if they were to be struck down in terms of residency requirements, do we see that as a potential benefit to small businesses?
Well, I think a lot of people are being creative about it, as well as social. Just like if you look at the social equity applicants, a lot of the times it could be, if there's a group of partners in a corporation, one of them could be a residency, or meet the requirements of it, and the other person could be out of state. Now, I don't know exactly how they work from state to state, but I know from social equity applicants, that's how essentially it works. One of them has to be a social equity qualifier, and the other ones don't have to be. So I'm sure sometimes there's those workarounds that exist in these applications or in the legal, jargon that they could go ahead and go around in that manner. So I think, yeah, it would impact some small businesses that don't have the know-how or the guidance to go around it, or, they don't see how they can. But I've seen people get creative and get things done and get licensed. So I'm sure it exists.
Okay. Now we have a group question coming from the chat. Might be one of our last ones. This has been a really great hour so far. But this question is coming from Paul Rothman. Is there a perception or reality of a lack of safety when it comes to cannabis retail operations? And what are the best ways for these to be mitigated? Chris, I'm going to direct this at you first.
So yeah, that I can answer. Is there a perception or reality of lack of safety? Yes. Right now, I'd say in the media, there's not enough sort of shine or talk about some of the issues that are going on within cannabis businesses and the targeted attacks, the burglaries and robberies that are happening constantly and that are increasing in nature and increasing in violence. This is directly causing businesses to leave municipalities. And let me be very clear, and I hope the municipalities are listening. This is a trickle effect. And it starts with the application process and understanding, one, the rules and regulations are, set forth, but may not be all that's required to keep you protected given your specific facts and circumstances. There is no cookie cutter rule. And I would argue that the status quo is extremely disconnected, and there are predatory vendors that exist within this space. So take a deep dive into the contracts, read the fine print, ask the hard questions before you engage with any security vendor. And it is not just retail that's being targeted. In our experience with our growing client base, it is non-retail that is getting hit the hardest because offenders are often after the product first and the cash second, although there is an argument to be made there, but that's just what we're seeing with our growing client base.
Thank you. And for Benjamin, on the insurance side, have we seen any changes that are affected by these changes or this data that's becoming available about potential safety risks in the industry?
Yeah, so the perception's always been there, along with other stigmas of the safetiness of the cannabis industry, along with, handling cash and, access to banking and all that whole jazz. But as far as insurance goes, there has been, as Chris was mentioning, that there've been certain areas, Oakland, LA, and San Francisco where, break-ins have been just more of a common thing. And I just recently saw here, there was a retail owner who posted a video not too long ago here, I seen it on LinkedIn, where people were trying to break into his retail shop. And because of his experience, he had a secured, door that they weren't able to break through on. And so I think, and yes, and that creates an impact in insurance of who can qualify. And if you do qualify in those certain areas, because it comes down to breaking down in zip codes. West LA may be different from, East LA and South LA. So it varies in as far as insurance qualification, if you'll be able to have coverage for it, along with the underwriting conditions of your safeguards that need to be in place anyway for inventory and other things. So you're going to have that first on the policy. And then if you are in an impacted zone or area, if you do qualify, it's going to be at a high rate and or a high deductible. So, long story short is just it's an issue depending where you're at. And then if you've had history of break-ins and you've made claims and you have that on your insurance history, it's going to be even harder to qualify now for insurance in general. So it's one of those things where it's a daunting situation for many people, for many operators. But if you have the proper security set up to deter it from the beginning, then that eliminates a lot of the issues. And I mean, obviously, a lot of these operators, if they're coming from the legacy market or from the previous market, they know how to take losses, if you know what I mean, and they know how to secure themselves and do things where they can avoid getting to the point of it. But I hope that answers the question there.
Risk management, I would argue it almost doesn't exist in the cannabis industry. If your security consultants are not talking directly with your insurance professional to understand what your safeguards are within your insurance policy and how to incorporate those into your security plan during the application process or even post licensing, you're already potentially facing a bunch of landmines that are much more expensive than doing things correctly the first time. This is what's decimating businesses today. It's a big issue. I'm glad we're talking about it now because it's affecting the industry and municipalities in a very, very big way. And risk management absolutely needs to be incorporated further into the cannabis industry.
And if I could add to that, by trade, I'm a licensed electrical engineer. So when people come to us, they immediately associate it with security cameras and security systems, and they do not go hand in hand. I've sent people to Chris actually a couple of times because people are asking. It's like that's not my level of expertise, and you don't want your electrical engineer doing the security design. And two, that leaves us as the engineers open for liability because we're not trained for that. They may have, if it's a large firm, they may have in-house security, but more often than not, you need to go to a security expert like Chris.
And one of the other risks I just want to really quickly mention is the increase in civil litigation, premise liability, negligent security, piercing the corporate veil. I'm speaking to the investors out there. Start to dive into who is your security consultant, who is your general contractor, who is your insurance professional. Are they talking together? Lawsuits unfortunately continue to rise. We see that in the industry as well, and I think it's important to note that some of the risks are not just burglaries and robberies, but civil litigation as well.
Yeah, I'm glad Chris brought that up. That's going to make my job easier if anybody's listening out there. It is so true. It's important to get it right from the beginning because a lot of the stories I hear is just, oh, I didn't know that existed, or I didn't know I needed that. It's just, well, it's something. If you're dealing with the right people who are in the industry and know how the process works when it comes to insurance or anything in between, it is important to know these factors so then you have all bases covered. And if you fail to prepare, then prepare to fail. That's the same old thing. So it's really that. And I think when you're just answering questions just for the sake of getting insurance, and the insurance is just taking it and not really diving in, then it's just a disservice all the way around. So honestly, it starts from you, giving the correct info and knowing what you can live with and live without, and then also knowing the pitfalls that may come from that, or so I think all that goes hand in hand, though.
We spoke earlier about the high barriers to entry and the expensive, entry points into this industry. And again, security is just a piece of it, but it's an important piece and it's a regulated piece. But it's something that really affects the long-term success of a business, and that's what implementing a risk management program does. So can't stress that enough, that as tight as money is for a lot of cannabis operators, choosing the cheapest option ultimately will lead you down a path to spend more money than if you do things right the first time.
Excellent. Okay, so I am going to add in one more quick question / statement from Savannah. I know we've been a little over the hour, but this is a very interesting panel today. So I will respect your time, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question. So from Savannah, speaking to the security and being aware of professionals in each kind of lane in which you are associating with consultants, her statement is, and who is the CFOs? It's another important question. So, and then followed up by Sean, who's been very active in the chat today as well. CPAs are also very important. So does anybody have any final comments on either of those two positions within the organization or within the organizations that people are affiliating with to achieve their project goals?
If I could just say, like, the culmination of having the right hands-on person, the CFO, the person who has the business background, like Bob was saying, finding that perfect mesh is going to be a task in itself. CPAs, security, your legal team, all this is important to dive in. Obviously, you want to get in the game and get profitable, and sometimes it's not a perfect fit or a perfect storm that everything's going to match up at one time. But I think it's taking accountability for what is going to make the most sense for you now. And then, as I always mention, as far as insurance goes, you have compliance insurance that you have to meet, and that's just for your licensing. Fine, if that's what's needed to get started. But these are the exposures that exist, is how I lay it out to people, to clients. And as long as they're willing to know to scale on that and to improve the coverages as they're moving along, and they know the surprises or not to be surprises that are going to come, I think that helps people as far as the cost goes, because that's the number one thing I hear, especially with new operators or even existing operators, is the cost. Things keep going up in general. So I know it's taking all those things into account. I'm not sure what they meant, but who is the CFO? So I think, but I think is getting all these things in place and prioritizing. But I hope that answers somebody's question there.
Excellent. Okay, so we're almost at 10 minutes over for today's panel, and I do know everyone has very busy days, being a Monday. So I do want to thank you all for joining us today. For any of the attendees, if there's any follow-up questions that you have for any of the panelists, you can email the regulatory licensing info number at our email at the bottom of the page, or I know everyone is very active on LinkedIn and other social media as well, so feel free to reach out to them directly as well. Isolocity, quality management systems, but we didn't get many questions specific to GMP and quality today. But just so everyone knows, they're amazing. So if you do have questions related to GMP and quality within your operations and for your plants, please feel free to reach out to their team, and they will give you great guidance and support. Thank you. It was a quiet hour for you today, but next time you're going to be the one talking for a full hour, probably.
Great, I learned a lot.
Excellent. As did I today. I love doing these panels. So as well, if anyone has really enjoyed today's chat, we are never going to say no to a nice Google review if you have the time. Never expected, but always appreciated. So I would like to once again thank all of our panelists and all of our attendees today for taking the time to be with Cannabis License Experts to learn more about the U.S. cannabis industry and what we're looking at going into 2023.